Welcome, Chris Kapp. We are so grateful that you could spend some time with us this afternoon. Please start off by sharing for our audience a little bit about who you are and how you came to be involved in space.
All right. Well, thank you very much. So my name is Chris Kapp. I'm an engineer for aerospace engineer, trained and educated here. To my background here, space has always been a passion since I was very small. That was because my father was a physicist, and he came to the United States on the tail end of Operation Paperclip. Oh, wow. For those who need to know a little bit more about Operation Paperclip, that was a multi-decade effort to bring German rocket scientists over to the United States after World War II. And my father was brought over early in 1960, and his professor in Vienna told a outrageous story that because being an alien and on this program, he couldn't enter the United States directly. So they flew him into Alaska, put him in a sealed car, drove him through Canada, and somehow got him across the border.
Wow. That is very interesting.
Right.
Now, were you born in New Mexico? Was your father working in New Mexico when you were born?
No, I was born in Germany, but my sister and my brother were born in the US.
Oh, that's very cool. Did you live in New Mexico, or was it Alabama?
Well, actually, first of all, it was for the US Army in Troy, New York, in their missile division.
Oh, wow.
Then later for Chrysler, believe it or not, in Detroit, who made missiles.
I didn't know that either.
And then at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base in Ohio.
Excellent. In Dayton, yes. Who knew that Lee Iacocca had missiles in his inventory?
Well, Chrysler was in the 60s a name for aerospace, believe it or not.
Wow, I did not know that. So your passion for space came very organically, right? You were around it. Did you ever?
I was brought up because, through my father's friends and his work, sometimes he'd take me on the base and I'd meet all these scientists and physicists. Even met the head of Project Blue Book at Wright-Pat when that was still a thing, UFOs and aliens. So you just grew up with being part of the space program.
Awesome. I had the privilege to meet very late in his life a fellow named Ernst Stuhlinger, who was NASA's first chief scientist, one of the Paperclip, folks we brought with Werner von Braun's team. Did you, as a kid, ever run in those circles or meet any of those folks, or were you and your dad's assignments sort of off, to yourself without a lot of your other German expats?
There were a lot of other German expats, and we as kids would play on your usual kind of German excursions in Dayton. And so I knew actually quite a few, and I actually got my first telescope from a German emigre from what is today Latvia.
Oh, wow. We had a student from Latvia. I want to ask a little bit more about your college experiences. I know you went to the university in Germany, but also, and I believe it was, I'm going to try to remember this, it was either Denmark or it was
Norway.
It was Norway, there was. So tell us a little bit about what it was like going to engineering school, abroad. Well, for us abroad, but what would be some of the differences that we see from the American maybe schooling versus there?
That was a pretty big deal. Got to add in that when I was 13, my dad passed away. And then we moved all back to Germany because my mother being German, and she felt comfortable doing that. So I had to learn German. So I did that. I knew a little bit, but not enough.
It's such a soft and tender language, isn't it?
So a little bit of a culture shock, but got over that and studied aerospace engineering in Aachen, Germany, which is the premier institute for engineering in Germany and one of the top 5 universities probably in Europe.
Okay.
And always wanted to, find a connection back into a different country, ideally to the US to do a semester there, but that was not available for engineers, only for English teachers, so I didn't qualify. But there was this wonderful program with the Norwegian Institute of Technology, as it was called back then. And it was actually on the world's first 3D CAD program, which was an enterprise between the Norwegian and the German government. So in the early 80s, we were actually doing 3D menu technique for machine parts and rotating machinery on a skid, on a computer before Microsoft came up.
Oh, wow. So
Right?
that,
And it was all programmed in a wonderful language nobody uses today called Fortran 77.
yes, I did not have to learn Fortran, but definitely I'm the, I don't want to say I'm younger, but I had to learn BASIC and Pascal. And Pascal was that was the pinnacle. But the people just a little bit older than me, they were going on and on about punch cards, having to literally punch a stack of cards and to load your program into the computer. Did you ever have to use punch cards in your day?
Yes, sir. And I get to trip over them and resort them. Yes, I did.
Oh.
Did you ever take a stack of them and write like your name on the edge so you would know sort of where the cards went in an order? What was your secret for keeping this massive stack of cards in the right order?
Well, fortunately, I never had to do that very much. I only did that in Aachen University. The Norwegians were far more advanced. I got the program directly into a VAX 780 supercomputer.
Oh, wow.
And there was a little story about that because back in those days, you needed a VAX 780 to program ballistic missiles.
Oh.
And so the Norwegians almost did not get the export license from the US government.
Got it. Was that an IBM product at the time?
Digital equipment.
Okay, that's outstanding. Now, so you always, you got this honest, this built-in genetic passion or proclivity for science and engineering. What aspects of space travel, humans in space, the exploitation of our resources in space, what early on excited you most, and how did that evolve over time as you're now a working adult and a professional?
Well, what excited me a lot, obviously, I grew up with all the Apollo launches on TV, so that's great. Everybody loved that. Very exciting stuff. But I also got to go to the lab where my dad would take me. I'm not sure that was officially approved, but you see a F-111 on the test stand, and he would do material research and all that. So I kind of felt like I was part of doing the research and the engineering there too as a little kid.
Oh yeah, I imagine so. Are you old enough to remember Sputnik, when Sputnik happened?
No, I was not alive at that time.
Okay, so you're not that much older than I am. So you were a child of the 60s, right?
Yep, early 60s.
Oh, that had to be a great time. Did you ever walk around in a white short sleeve shirt with black horn rimmed glasses and smoke cigarettes and do astrodynamic calculations?
No, I did not.
I think that was me in a previous life, right? I think I was born a little bit past that, but I so enjoyed, the movies that, like Hidden Figures.
They all have the short sleeve button downs with the ties.
Short sleeve white shirts. But if you think about the movies like Hidden Figures, where you see the chalkboard of equations, it is amazing that so much was done at the eve of being able to use computers and the understanding of the math.
Well, since I'm living in Houston right now, so when you think about that, they had 20 megabytes of storage at Mission Control Center, 20 megabytes of storage that occupied 2 floors of a building. And that got you to the moon
megabytes on
back.
2 floors, 20 megabytes.
That's 4 pictures, maybe.
That's what I was going to say. I can just barely with my phone attach 20 megabytes of photos to send on a single email. That's amazing.
So it was very amazing what they could do with the technology back then.
Right.
I'd like to talk a little bit about, you have this joint venture, and I'm sure that I butchered the name in the introductions. Tell us a little bit about, you started, I believe it was a program abroad when you first went back. Is that right?
Right. So I finished my aerodynamics, aerospace engineering, and being in Germany at that time, I was not a US citizen either. the scenario wasn't too bright. There weren't too many places to go to, so I went into industry and did turbomachinery, turbines, compressors, pumps, all that kind of good stuff. And the company back then, which no longer exists, has been broken up since, was the second largest engineering company in the world back then, Mannesmann. And they sent me all around the place, from Germany into England, where I worked into the North Sea and did a lot of stuff on offshore platforms. And then they said, why don't you set up for us a joint venture in India?
Oh, wow.
Right. And that was to package their equipment, compressors. Now, this was before anybody even thought IT could be, India could be an IT hub.
Mm.
So I had to bring in my own computers. I had to import color printers. I had to import everything.
Wow.
Just wasn't available in India. So these were the early days when India was opening up for industrial development.
Was this the 80s, the 1980s?
This was early 90s.
Early 90s. Okay. All right. When you talk about turbines, were you talking about like turbine power, like power generation, where you're burning some kind of fuel and then using the high pressure steam to create electricity? Is that what we're talking about?
That's part of it. You can also use those gas turbines to drive compressors on offshore platforms. I did a lot of that too. A great project in the North Sea where we used 4 large Rolls-Royce aeroderivative gas turbines to drive mammoth compressors.
Okay.
Which would pump natural gas.
Okay. My limited experience in a life long ago, when I was a young man, I was a chemist and I worked in industrial chemistry. And I remember being around paper mills where had these massive General Electric turbine generators, and they had shivs shoved everywhere because they, they were always battling with keeping the vibrations under control, because this massive generator would walk away with you. It would literally, you could have a lot of trouble if you didn't have all of your vibrations accounted for. Have you ever dealt with any of those vibrations?
Absolutely. So those are the large industrial GE frame gas turbines, we call them, because they were not aeroderivative. And they were quite something to work with.
Yeah.
Very large, in my opinion, very difficult, but that's what they were.
Yes, they were. That's they were. Do you have any like one great story from working in the North Sea? I'm sure the weather there was always sunny and pleasant and warm. Do you have any great stories, or at least one tiny story you can tell us about working on a platform out in the North Sea?
Well, I did this inspection on a platform in the North Sea for an unnamed operator. I don't want to embarrass them. And because we were doing a retrofit with the Rolls-Royce turbines and our compressors. And we were inspecting that, and we were looking at the existing equipment. And quite frankly, with all the corrosion there, after 20 years of operation, all the pumps and compressors were just corroded through and through. You could just look through the casing towards the other end as well. So I was amazed what difficult environmental conditions can do to equipment.
Yeah, salt water is tough. Yes.
Salt water is very tough.
Let's talk a little bit about your publications. So I know that you have a new book coming out. Tell us how, what maybe your publications are in as far as the research that you do. And it looks like you have a book called Selling Engineered Products. So give a little plug for that.
Right. So I'm in the business of selling large amounts of power, large amounts of compression, large amounts of pumping, particular for oil and gas companies. And every project is different. So you cannot go in with a bespoke project from the shelf and say, here's my Mercedes 350 SEL. I'm just going to apply it on this project. So you have to engineer it. That falls outside of normal business theory. So I decided to write a book on how you engineer and how you sell those products most successfully. There actually was no publication out there from Harvard or any of the big business schools on how you would do something that you have to engineer as you go through the project.
Okay.
Yeah.
So
now this is a good skill set, because this is actually what our space pioneers are doing, right? All the SpaceXs, they're engineering their product as they're going along and then adapting this for additional use and purposes.
I find that really wonderful, the iterations of even like the Starship development, how you watch the videos and they start out blowing up on the test stand and then they blow up in the air and then they blow up when they're landing. And one of them blew up after it had landed. But, eventually we're going to have people riding on those. And I know they're making substantive improvements with every, all along the way with that.
Yeah, it's tremendous to see that, and you're right, because like Elon Musk will tell you, you need to test it till destruction to really know what you're doing. But by the same token, NASA wouldn't always do that because you have to have that public appearance of perfect safety.
Yes. And if you think about test pilots, right, they were always, quote, pushing the envelope, always. When you watch the development of a new fighter, they start by rolling it down the runway, and then they'll do just barely clearing the runway. And every successive flight, they expand the parameters for which they're the rigor of that test. The difference is you've got people. If you have people riding on the vehicle, and that adds all of that concern for safety. The thing that fascinated me most as an adult, never as a kid, was that the space shuttle was never tested unmanned. The first time it flew, it had people on it. And if you think about it from an engineering standpoint, that's pretty gutsy of NASA, right? That's
extremely risky.
It was, right? Because we think about the Atlas was blowing up in the 60s before John Glenn flew on it. Oh, it seemed like every other flight, the way history records it. And they had a lot of bugs to get worked out on the Atlas before John Glenn flew.
And this kind of engineering development, getting larger and larger, doing different applications, very common in the oil and gas and the industries. So maybe 40 years ago, a large compressor would have been 20 megawatts.
Right.
Now you don't get excited until you're over 75 megawatts in power rating.
Awesome. What do you see as the future in your industry? Where do you see the most opportunities for disruption in the world that where you live and earn your living in these large scale compressors and turbines and whatnot?
Well, we're going through that right now. So COVID was actually the kickoff event, and now everything has to be about environmentally friendly production. Right. What was a bit poo-pooed maybe even just 2 years ago, where I did presentations on how to reduce methane emissions. A lot of people in the audience felt, no, that's not necessary. We're already good enough.
Right.
Now it's all about, okay, how can I do the best job possible? So that's kicking off a whole different range of developments and products and services to minimize emissions.
Okay. Yeah, I know as a chemist, my background is in chemistry, biochemistry. I know methane is a much more it's a molecule of concern as far as greenhouse gas, right? It's
Right.
And it's often a byproduct, right? It sort of leaks through am I right that it sometimes it's just comes up out of the ground where there's a well?
Well, most of the methane comes up through the well. A lot of it does.
Okay.
So 80-90% of the methane will come out of the well.
Awesome. Well, let's pivot just a little bit into you're a space ambassador, a certified space ambassador with the National Space Society. How did you get, or how long ago did you get involved with the Space Society? And tell us a little bit about your happy place there and what you enjoy as far as your role there and activities.
Yeah, I got involved about 3 years ago. I mean, I really was reading the magazine for quite a while, but I got involved as space ambassador. And what really got me going in that direction was my desire to expand on my son's experience educationally in high school. Unbelievably or not, he went to one of 4 high schools in the United States that collaborate with NASA, engineering and making parts for the International Space Station.
Was this the Hunch program? Was this the
Hunch?
Yes.
The Hunch program.
Yes.
And so naturally, as a parent, we all got associated with that. And he was involved on 3 different projects for the International Space Station. One was the galley table. One was a transportation module. But his last project, where he was project lead, was actually the first extravehicular project for high school students. And that was a device for making sure you can unscrew the solar batteries and replace them with the new lithium batteries without worrying about the screw connection scoring.
Okay.
Right? Which is a big deal, right? Because hey, if I can't take that battery off in space, I'm kind of stuck.
Right, right. And it has to be done with a suit on, right? So you've got all the limited mobility and access. It's much more difficult with that big suit on out there outside the vehicle.
So they had their own CAD systems. They had their own workshop. They made all their own parts. It was then inspected by companies like Lockheed Martin, and there's a whole dedicated NASA engineering department. So it's a wonderful experience. And I want to share that. And that was my motivation to become space ambassador. And that's also what I then presented at the ISDC this year, was here's a program that you can sponsor, which really needs to be expanded. And this is how we're going to train our future generation of engineers for space.
We totally agree with you. That is wonderful.
I mean, in fact, that's the same, the same mentality, really, the idea of the real hands-on work that, Kevin, when he started his group building CubeSats, the idea was we're not going to just learn about them. They actually built them and they're launching them. There's something to be said, our educational system here is so wrong in thinking that kids can't do real work. They don't have to wait to the university level. They need to be starting much younger, not only to understand even more about, the content area, but just to develop that passion for it.
Well, I was totally amazed. I also teach engineering at a local college here, Lone Star College in Houston. And they're not nearly as well set up to prepare our next generation of engineers as Cy Woods High School, just 5 miles down the road.
That's sad. It's sad.
And even if the child, even young kids, even if they're limited in, say, their knowledge of calculus or dynamics or statics, the things that you can teach them are about working in teams and good communication channels and learning processes. And what we found is project management, right? Taking your task and you can make a Gantt chart, and you need to understand risk matrices, right? We make our kids do a risk matrix on different subsystems of their satellites and have them give real thought to why does this event belong in this yellow, green, or red square, and how do we mitigate it? So I like the idea of let's just call it critical thinking, right?
Very, very much so. And my son always brought stories home. It kind of sounded like from my own work almost. He said, "Man, Dad, those engineers from Lockheed, they changed my specification again. Now I got to redo everything."
Yes, that's real world, right?
It's funny when you hear little kids just spouting off these technical terms that even like Kevin did a PDR yesterday for their CubeSat proposals, and the kids were up there in their suits and they've got all their charts going on. And I've been around working with Kevin now for about 6 years, and there are times that I just go, I don't know what they were talking about at all. But the engineers, of course, in the audience who are there to give them the advice, are like, yeah, but have you thought? I mean, to me, as again, the layman, or oftentimes I would imagine the parents in their shoes, unless you're in engineering, they must be really just taken aback by that. We've got to do a better job with how we present, STEM to children in our country.
We need to do a much, much better job. And so therefore I wrote that on my flag and said, how can I make more people aware of Hunch? How can I make more people adapt something like Hunch? And there are actually 1 or 2 additional schools who have now come on board just because I've presented this scheme.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Well, we'll talk a little bit more about that, but we are at the end of our time. So we usually close with asking if you've got, again, our listeners are really avid aerospace students, some who have gone off to university, teachers like us as well, and those parents. So if you have any, what advice you have for those kids who are just thinking, I'm excited to get out into this career field, but I'm a little bit nervous as well. Any advice at all for those parents, students, or teachers out there?
Well, engineering is always going to pay the bills. And engineering is fun. So follow your passion, because right now the sky is not the limit. there is so much opportunity in aerospace to have a wonderful career and achieve amazing things.
That's wonderful. And thank you so much for today, Chris. If you'll send us the links to your book and maybe even to your class that you teach at, is it Lone Star College? Did I get that right?
That's right.
We will, Shauna will share
Happily
that.
put it in the notes so that people can go there and buy your book.
Yes.
Awesome. Thank you. I will send that.
Perfect.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for your time today. We really enjoyed it.
And I'll send you also the Hunt presentation.
Thank you.
Absolutely.